Hello guys, and welcome back to another installment of Weathering Models with Dan. Today we're going to be looking at another unique prototype. This one is going to be a brand new Tangent HO GACX patched 4750 covered hopper. Now this is a Trinity style 4750 that Tangent has recently released, and I gotta say, of course, being a Tangent car, it is incredibly nice. There's a lot of great detailing, and it is a proper model of a Trinity 4750. These are the later versions of the 4750 type cars that came out that were manufactured by Trinity. The original cars were mostly Pullman, Portec, and another company I think made some too, but this is the more modern type of 4750 that came out in the 80s, and a lot of these are still around today. This particular car is a former BN car, so there's a lot of really nice dark green paint that we're going to have to do some fading to. We're going to add some rust to this, and some grime, of course, and we're going to also have to work around all of the factory patchwork, which is going to be interesting. So here's a look at the prototype photo of the real car, which is by Tangent, and you can see exactly what I was talking about. We're going to have to fade the green a little bit. We're going to have to add some rust, some grime, and general underbody grime, and some other nice little weathering effects to this car to make it look much more prototypical. The first step is going to be the fade, and talking about fading here, for the green I'm going to be using acrylic yellow. Most of the time for a green car like this, you can use an acrylic yellow like this, or even an oil yellow. Those work very well to tone down the green. The downside here is if you use a yellow fade, you do have to go back and clean up a lot of that white lettering on a BN car like this, for example. But that's a small price to pay for a realistic fade. In this case, I'm going to be using a little bit of 70% isopropyl alcohol, and I'm mixing some Anita's Gold acrylic yellow into my little airbrush canister there. We're going to be applying this with the airbrush running at 40 psi as normal. And I'm going to be going for a very thin wash here. With fade paints, you want to go as thin as possible without the paint being so diluted that it's watery. It needs to be diluted enough, kind of like what you see here, what's coming out of the brush, where it's a very diluted wash, if that makes sense. This is going to flow very nicely through the airbrush, and it's going to give us nice, light, even coats of fade as we pass over this model here. For demonstration, I'm starting on the ends, and you'll notice that I have the car upside down, and this is just because of all of the particular angles of a 4750, as we've talked about before. 4750s can be a bit of a challenge to fade and work on because there's just a lot of obscure angles and nooks and crannies and hidden corners and stuff like that, so it's best to hit a car like this at multiple angles to get everything thoroughly and evenly covered. You can see that paint, even though you can't see it super close here, is very thin, but relatively quickly we start getting a nice fade coat on this car, and you can see it's very thin and even, and that's the name of the game here. We don't want thick coats of paint, we want light, even paint coats, just to very slowly build that color up, because you can take this too far very quickly and it can get out of hand. So I also want the paint to be even, and that's again why we're using such a thin coat of paint. And I'm going and I'm working in different motions with my hand there. You can see I'm just simply blasting that paint about half trigger here on my dual action brush to apply that paint in and work it into those end cages and onto that end slope sheet. This is all the base effects. Obviously later on we'll add some grime and stuff, so we'll basically be repeating similar processes to the ends when we get to it, and also for the ends, but for now I'm just working all that fading in. It's starting to take shape here, though very slowly, and you just got to be patient. Once you get to a certain part of the car, then you can switch to another while the other section dries, just being careful not to handle areas that you've already painted. What I'm doing now is I'm working on the roof, and I'm working that paint around the roof walks and around that top hatch. I have not masked up these parts. All I'll have to do is clean these back off with a Q-tip later on to get all the yellow off of them. I'm just focusing on fading the green on the car body, obviously. And I'm just making slow, gradual passes, just like I did for the ends. The sides, exact same way here. I make very quick, rough passes across each rib, across each panel section, until I get the desired fade. Now, a lot of these BN cars, I mean, especially nowadays, you'll see some where the green has basically turned a lime green. And hopefully later on we can sew a subject that kind of looks like that. I know I've shown similar BN cars on my channel before, but never actually the entire process of fading it to that extreme of levels. So maybe down the road I'll get another prototype in where I can talk about doing a more extreme fade on this car. But this is a very good fade to give you an idea of how these color fades work. You can see that yellow is starting to subdue that green very slowly, and it's starting to come a lot more to life here. It's a lot more prototypical. It's starting to look really good. We're getting that nice bluish yellow faded green that these particular BN cars have. It looks really nice. There's another look at the car. After everything has dried, we've gotten this really nice, subdued, subtly faded green color. It is absolutely perfect. Off camera, after this clip was taken, I proceeded to clean off all of the patching and all of the lettering using a sliced Q-tip with a fine tip installed in my X-Acto knife holder, and I very carefully cleaned off all of the lettering, all the patching, everything like that, and then I sealed the car in with dull coat in preparation for the next step, which is grime application. Now for the grime application, well, we have the airbrush out, of course. We're going to be doing our grime coats. Now I have two different canisters of varying dilutions of this paint. This is earth brown and black acrylic paints mixed with our 70% isopropyl alcohol. I have a thin wash, which is what I have in hand here, which is what I'm going to be starting with. And then I also have a thicker wash that I'm going to set aside for certain areas of the car. The thinner wash is just slightly less diluted than our fade coat. This is going to be just so we can get all of the grime into the nooks and crannies and all of the corners of the car, like on the ends in particular, and for doing our kick-up lines and stuff like that, while getting a pretty decent bit of coverage with our paint. This is an area where we don't want to necessarily have super thin paint because we'd be killing ourselves having to sit there and make 100 passes in one area just trying to put grime on it. And in this case, on the underbody, where the majority of the grime is going to be, we need to apply a lot of grime relatively quickly so we can work cleanly and efficiently. So I'm using a slightly less diluted wash here to work into these areas. There you can see I'm starting to work it down the coupler boxes. I'm working it into that center sill and on the ends of the bays, and then I'm very carefully working it up into all those little areas in between. Working in one section at a time here, I just darken things out. And if I need to add a little bit more grime after this layer dries, I can always go back and add some more. It's super easy. I just go back in here, and I keep working it into all those little corners. The coupler pocket, again, is a tricky area because there's a lot of little hidden areas. So you just really want to make sure, if you're using the airbrush, that you get in to all of those little nooks and crannies to make sure everything is as evenly covered as possible. And remember, the majority of the grime is going to be around the areas where the wheels are going to be. Now switching up to the roof walk area. On the top of the car, there's going to be a lot of grime on this area, obviously, and then it's going to slowly work down the side of the car. So I'm going to start at the top here with my grime, and I'm going to start painting in some of the grime around the hatch and around the walkways. These areas are going to obviously get a lot of the grime and a lot of the rust, and obviously we're going to add some oils and stuff like that later on. This is just the primer weathering, as like I like to call it. We're adding some little patches of rust and grime just in certain areas where I want it to be. And I'm also going to start building up little patches of grime kind of coming out from underneath that roof walk onto the ends and the sides of the car, as you can see what I'm doing here. And this is in preparation for putting the oils over it, and those are going to be areas where I'm going to be adding thicker layers of oil paint and then streaking oils down the side of the car to represent rust run. And you can see I'm now going to keep working on the ends and the underbody a little bit more. And I'm also going to start working on doing some of the shading to the sides. Now this is a cool little trick here, and this is again another benefit of using a thinned wash. You can do some little bits of panel grime in here, making it look like you have kind of the wavy panel effect you see in a lot of box cars and a lot of covered hoppers like this, where the grime sort of channels and builds up in little recessed pockets on the sides. And you get this cool little wavy effect of rust and grime buildup. And doing this trick with an airbrush is really handy because you can get a whole side covered relatively quickly. As you can see, I'm adding some little blotches and scrapes of stuff here, just here and there scattered about, and I'm kind of using my prototype photos to get a general reference of where these kind of need to be, but I'm doing this sort of freehand. As you can see, I'm just simply holding my hand with my other hand just to kind of steady my hand a little bit. Now I've switched to the really thick oil and acrylic wash, excuse me, just acrylic wash here. And here you can see the benefit of using a thicker paint. I can get a heavier buildup of paint to do stuff like kick-up lines. And this is going to be on each side of the bay and on the interior of the bay, and of course on the ends, because every one of these covered hoppers will have kick-up, especially an older car with an older paint job. You're going to see those defined kick-up lines. So again, that thick diluted wash of acrylics will do an excellent job of very quickly building up these kick-up lines on the panels of your car. The other benefit of using this is that when you use a thicker wash, you get a little bit of splatter from the air gun, which is actually in a rare case where splatter from your airbrush is actually accepted, because it creates those little splatters that you see in real life. Now into the application of the oils. And again, I've dull coated the entire car in preparation for this, and using my water mixable oil paints, I'm going to take a flat bristle brush, one of my trusty favorites here, and I'm going to mix little bits of oil in at a time into my brush, and then I'm just going to take it right into the model. And in this case I'm starting at the roof, that way I can work in some of that fresh, heavier, coarser rust in with that fine tip brush into all of the little nooks and crannies around the roof walk and around the hatch. Around that hatch especially is where there's going to be a lot of grain and load buildup that creates and channels moisture. A lot of rust is going to build up in those areas relatively quickly, so that's going to be an area you really want to concentrate on to begin with, and then all that rust is going to slowly channel underneath the roof walk and work down the side of the car, obviously. Here you can see I've moved the brush at a different angle, and again I'm just going in and I'm applying a little bit of this paint in a very blotchy manner. I'm just trying to get random blotches of rust paint right now, and I'm just trying to go down the side of the car and scrape it up a little bit and rough it up a little bit so it just kind of creates that random unique effect that you see with real rust, just adding little rust patches here and there. In the zoomed in shot you'll be able to see this a lot better. You can see the type of brush I'm using. It's basically just a thinner camel hair brush. I pick up the oil, dry brush it slightly on a paper towel, and then transfer the brush onto the model. And I'm being careful to work the brush slightly underneath those roof walks. Now for the sides, and this is going to be an important step here because I'm going to be painting some very fine rust lines. And to do this I'm going to be using two of the relatively same type of brush, which are, it's like a synthetic soft bristle brush. What I do with these to paint rust lines very fine on the side of the car is I'll prep the sides first by taking a little bit of paint thinner, and I'll start working down the side of the car, one little section at a time, and I'm just basically wetting the sides here. It's basically just surface preparation to allow the oils to glide over the surface of this car. After I've worked that in a small area at a time, again keep that in mind, I can then take a different but similar brush, load it up with a little bit of that oil, and then in small areas at a time I'm going to slowly pull some paint down the side of the car. And guys, I apologize for my hand being in the way here. It's unfortunately what happens a lot of times just with my particular setup that I have right now. To be able to get in here and get these fine shots, I often find myself letting my hand get in the shot, and this is an unfortunate case. But hopefully you can kind of see what's going on here. I'm very carefully pulling the brush down the side of the car with that fresh oil, and it's very gently working down and fanning out. And the thinner is letting the paint fan out. It's letting it work itself down the sides very smoothly and evenly, as you can see. Here in a close-up shot, again, hopefully this will be a slightly better angle, you can again see this technique in a nutshell. I apply the thinner in a small area at a time, pick up a little bit of the oils, and then I'm going to very slowly take the brush, put it at the top of that sill, and then very slowly control my hand as best I can to pull the paint down. Slowly and evenly here. Take your time on a car like this. There's no reason why you need to rush through this. I'm just doing this very slowly and getting each individual rust spot in as best as I can. In this close-up shot you can see how well that came out. This technique is pretty much dynamite for doing cars like this, and you can knock out a number of these cars relatively quickly as long as you work carefully doing this technique. There you can see we've gotten some very convincing looking rust that is now coming down from the top of the car. Next up, we're going to do fine detailing, and stuff like fine detailing would be things like adding the kick-up splatter, doing fine streaks, scrapes, rust dots, pitting, anything like that. In this case, I've done a little bit of black acrylic mixed with a little bit of brown, and I'm splattering it with a metal straight edge and a coarse bristle brush onto the sides of the bays where you're going to have a lot of the kick-up splatter coming off those wheels. And I'm going to be doing this on each corner of the model, and of course on the interior end sheet of the car as well, because that's going to gather a lot of that splatter and a lot of that streaking and things like that. That's going to be a high traffic area for that kind of splatter. This technique can be done very quickly. It's just a key of basically keep moving with that paint, and you just keep it very wet. Here what I'm doing now is I'm using a little bit of fresh dark earth brown oil paints, and I'm applying these full strength using a fine tip brush. This is just going in here and adding some very fine dots. You can of course also do that with some acrylic paint as well. It just depends on the color of the rust dot. If it's an older rust dot, I might use an acrylic paint, and if it's a fresher rust dot that's starting to streak down, in almost every case in that particular instance, I'll use oils. And in this case, I'm using the oils, and I'm just letting them streak across the sides of the car to replicate little rust dots, pits, scrapes, everything like that that's normal on a 4750 that's been around the block a while. A lot of these times on cars like this, you'll see that kind of scraping. Now here's a nifty little trick for the underbays. A lot of times the underbays have hammer marks and pitting, and a clever way to do this little technique on these bays is by using a very fine tip micron ink pen, and I just basically go in and dot the pen across the bay on each bay to replicate some of these little rust dots or hammer marks as you call them. It's very common for these guys to take hammers and basically smack the bays to loosen up any grain that's been packed down in transit. That's a common thing you see on cars like that. Now we're going to work on the powders, and this is obviously kind of a finishing touch to a car like this. As you can see, I've done all of the final painting, and I've gone in and sealed up all of the oil paint work after a couple days of letting this cure, obviously. And what I'm doing now is I'm taking some dark rust earth tone Monroe Models powders and some earthy grime powders, and I'm applying these powders around the hatch again, around little lock bars, hinges, pins, things like that where rust is going to generally gather. And again, that area between the roof walk and the walkway is going to be a very heavy area where you're going to see a lot of fresher rust start to work around. There you can see it's starting to work over the side, and again I'm just using a fine tip brush, kind of an assortment of powder brushes here, which are just old retired paint brushes to apply these powders. You just work it over the sides in certain areas. Of course I'll apply powders and grime and everything like that to the trucks in my usual manner. I'm not going to show that for this particular car just because I've shown that many times before in other videos. And here's the finished product. I think it turned out really good. This GACX car took me about 3 weeks to complete, and I couldn't be happier with the results. You can see all of the very fine little rust dots, all of the splatter, all of the kick up, all of the fine, super nice detailing that has basically completed this car. And I hope you guys have learned something from watching this technique video. I hope that you subscribe here for more, and stay tuned for the next video to come on similar weathered cars. Thank you for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.